We've eliminated lawyers and accountants.
Yeah. Bankers, you can throw them out too.
Bankers are gone.
Yeah. Any managerial and administrative position is generally very low creative.
Wow.
Writers, artists, movie makers, literary people. I wouldn't say professors. We did a study a while back predicting what graduate student attributes predicted scientific success. Creativity was negatively correlated. Well, it's because, again, science is actually an algorithmic machine, right? That's why it's so powerful, is that you can get people who aren't creative but who will work hard, and they crank the levers, and out comes knowledge. And it's an extraordinarily powerful technology. But you can't get creative things published. You can get incrementally better things published. Creative things, it's like no one has any idea what to do with them. And the non-creative people will think, no, that's rubbish. It's like they don't know any better, but it's very, very hard to evaluate.
Are you creative?
See my socks?
Yeah, no. That wasn't you, that was Van Gogh.
Yeah, but I picked them out. Actually, my wife picked them out. But I'll wear them. Yes, I'm creative.
I wanted to ask you, and I think we have a bit of time left, I wanted to get in a little bit deeper. Some of the controversies that we have lived through in the past here at the National Gallery, let's talk about Voice of Fire, for example. And one of the arguments was, well, there's no skill involved, where's the creativity? And that's, from my point of view, it's very easy to answer. Following what you've just said, Barnett Newman, who was a lousy painter, wasn't even interested in painting, was actually one of the most important artists of the 20th century, gave himself these constraints. He really, really restricted his field of operation to vertical stripes, and with a sort of metaphorical connection to humanity and our vertical aspirations. Can we talk about creativity when we're getting into an area of extreme constraint on the part of an artist, a minimalist who paints, let's just say, someone like, there's a very famous Polish artist whose name escapes me right now, but somebody's going to yell that out, who counted for his entire life and then took a picture of himself every 10 years, and just counted until the color ran out, and then he starts over with another color. And his name is not coming to me.
Okay.
But so, if you're looking at this objectively, conceptually, it's really quite powerful and unique, and these paintings, there's one at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and we will always regret not having one here at the National Gallery. We're not likely to have one. He died. And they're quite sought after. Can you still talk about creativity when someone has a great idea in 1964 and then just proceeds to produce that idea and replicate the same thing for the rest of their lives? I'm getting into the deep psychoanalysis of creativity.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things I would say about that. The first is that people were upset about that painting because they think that art is decoration. And they thought, well, that's not decoration, or they think that I'd be able to do that, which they wouldn't, by the way, because it's a lot harder than it sounds or than it looks. But art is not decoration. That's absolutely foolish. Art is exploration. And artists train people to see. Like, when most of you would, I presume, would regard Impressionist art as both self-evidently beautiful and also as relatively traditional, because, of course, you all now see, like Impressionists see, all of you that are even vaguely part of the 20th century. You can't help it, because the Impressionist aesthetic saturated everything, saturated advertisement, saturated movies, saturated everything. You now see like an Impressionist. They taught you to see, but back when the Impressionists first showed up, there were riots when their art was hung, because the idea of perceiving that way was so radical that it caused people to have emotional fits. And so artists teach people to see, and I mean that literally. It's very hard to perceive the world. And so, and who was the artist that made all the squares with red and yellow and white?
Oh, Pete Mondrian.
Mondrian, he's a great example. I mean, if you go downtown Toronto now, there are Mondrian buildings everywhere. And so he was playing very, very carefully and intensely with these arrays of geometric shapes, and that's not well, I like it, but it's not particularly decorative, and it's certainly not naturalistic or realistic. It's like, what's this crazy guy up to with all his squares? It's like, well, everything is built out of squares. So he's thinking, well, what are the interesting things we can do with squares so they shimmer and glow, and so that we get the geometric harmony proper, and it's just invaded architecture. You can see Mondrian absolutely everywhere. And so these people, so here's a way of thinking about artistic and creative people from a biological perspective. So imagine that the world is basically an explored territory inside an unexplored territory. Every world is like that. Everywhere you go is like that. There's things you know and there's things you don't know. And the conservative people like to be in the middle of the things that are known. And they can master that space, and they're good at maintaining it. But the artists like to be right out on the edge, and that's the edge between chaos and order. And they like to expand the domain of order out into the chaos. And they do that first by transforming perception. And you can see very concrete examples of this if you think about what creative people do in cities. They always do the same thing. So they're starving to death, and this is partly why, but they go in a city and they look at some ratty area that's sort of quasi-criminal and that's seen better days, and they go there and they think, you know, with a little work, this could be cool. And so then they rush in there and they build some galleries and show some art, and they civilize it a bit, and then a coffee shop pops up, and you know, the next thing you know, the yuppies move in because they're sort of creative but also kind of conservative, so they're the next ones into the frontier, and then the developers show up and they kick all the artists out. But that's okay, because then the artists go off and rejuvenate some other area, and that's what artists do, is that they're transforming chaos into order all the time. That's where they live on that edge. And so it's a very tough place to live because you can fall into the chaos at any time.
This is kind of blowing my mind, actually, because I just wrote recently in the commemorative book for the 150th here at the gallery that science helps us understand the world, whereas artists create a world that we can understand. It's just they're sort of it amounts to the same, but they're opposite approaches.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and you just said that.
Artists have always been on the frontier of human understanding. You know, the artist bears the same relationship to society that the dream bears to mental life. Like when you're dreaming at night, you're actually pretty creative when you're dreaming, and that's why when you remember your dream, you think, oh man, like where did that come from? Which is pretty weird, that something can happen in your head and you have no idea how it got there or what it means. That's a bloody miracle. You know, every night that happens. It's like, I had a dream. Where did it come from? What does it mean that you had it? How can you not understand it? How can you produce something like that? It's like a whole movie that you don't even understand. You produce it. You don't produce it. You experience it. The dream is the thing that mediates between order and chaos. It starts to make chaos into order. So it's half chaos. That's why it's not comprehensible. And artists play exactly the same role in society. They're the visionaries that start to transform what we don't understand into at least what we can start to see. And they've always been that. They've always been at the vanguard. That's their biological niche.
So they're creating confidence for the community.
They're the civilizing agent.